As I started this series with walkthrough of all price sheets and stuff, I started with the REC brand of computers. In the beginning, I imported everything that I sold from mostly Hong Kong and Shanghai and other Chinese suppliers. I didn't make any dealings direct with the factories, but there was a lot of wholesale dealers that sold in small quantities to Norwegian dealers. And Camco was the first brand that I sold that actually was a brand name computer. And they actually had a very, very high quality set of components in their machines. And this price list that it's from the June 1992 is the first price list I have from Camco. And I actually started the job with becoming a reseller from them in April of 1992, and there was this process with being approved as a dealer. And they started up their Norwegian office in the start of 1992. When they started in Denmark, I don't know. As I said, I have not been able to find much information about Camco from Danish sources. And they had quite frequent updates. I got this price list not every month, but sometimes every month and sometimes every other month. And in the end, they only supplied this list about once a quarter, and then they changed so that some of the prices was called for new prices. And they also, often in between the price lists, they supplied these sheets with news or price drops. And sometimes it was prices that was going up, but mostly it was prices going down, as was the norm back then. And here they have some new VGA monitors, and this is typical for the area. This is a June 1992 leaflet, and of course it's color monitors, it's 17-inch monitors, and it's multimedia set with CD-ROMs and other stuff. And bear in mind that this was the early days for CD-ROM. So here they have a Sound Blaster Pro kit with a CD-ROM drive. And in the price in to me as a dealer is almost 5,000 krona, 4,700 Norwegian krona. And they suggested that this should sell for 7,000 krona. And that was quite a norm, and the most expensive part of this was not the sound card. The sound card was about 1,000 krona. And CD-ROM drives in 1992, that was not a very cheap solution. And they also, as I said, they have price drops. And for this, they offered that can get a 486 SX computer to the same price as a 386. And this was the time period where the 386s was moving fast out of the market. The regain of the 386 was almost at an end in the end of 1992, and I don't think I sold a single 386 computer in 1993, but I did sell some in 1992. Yes, and as you might know, the 486 SX is a fully qualified 486, but it had the MAT coprocessor disabled internally. And this price list is about the same in some of the variations as I have walked you through before from this price list from Rask and Gro. And they list the bare bone systems here by processor type. And as you can see, they still sold a 286. They had a 386SX, 16, 25 megahertz, and they listed the systems with different options. And the most expensive one had a good 0.28 millimeter pitch VGA screen, while the lowest quality had a monochrome screen, and they also sold some 0.39 millimeter pitch VGA screens, and those had quite a grainy picture, and it was almost impossible to use it with higher resolutions than normal VGA. And you also have all the different 386 normal versions, but they also sold some low-end offerings in between of these. But they follow all the same module, and this machines was delivered with an 80 megabyte hard drive, almost all over the place, but the budget options had 40 megabyte hard drive. And what was quite special about dealing with a brand name dealer is that they actually made sure that everything was okay regarding regulations. And Camco actually registered all their computers with Camco, as was the standardization organization, and you actually on this time was not allowed to sell electronic equipment in Norway that was not Camco branded. And they also sold notebook computers. These notebooks was about the same that I've showed you in earlier videos with original equipment manufacturers, OEM machines that they rebranded. And this NB2210 is also sold in Norway, both under the brick name and under the name of REC. And probably many others too. I don't have the full overview of that. And they sell motherboards, cabinets, power supplies, hard drive controllers of every brand you can think of. And they also had XT hard drive controller that allowed you to connect an EDI hard drive to an XT computer. It's kind of like the XT IDE interface of today, but they actually had this as an option back in the day. And this was a quite useful thing that I actually sold a lot of, because all computers that had MFM or RLL drives, it was quite impossible, and it was very, very expensive when the IDE drives was flooding the market to get higher capacity or replacement drives for that standard. So when I bought this card for only about 500 kronas, I remember, including freight charge, it was much, much more affordable for the customer than if I replaced their existing hard drive on the existing interface. So this controller I sold a lot of back in the day. Yes, and they have floppy drives, and we can look up some of the prices on this. A CD-ROM drive with controller internal cost 3,000 Norwegian krona, and a floppy drive was 450 Norwegian krona. So this was quite common prices back in the day, and Camco was not the lowest priced brand. It was actually at this time possible for an end user to buy for about the same price, but some of the prices they had here was actually quite good. And they have a very broad collection of different items, so I actually enjoyed quite a lot of dealing with Camco. As you can see here, they had all these monitors, they have all these VGA cards, And they even had some special, even back in this time, Hercules CGA and monochrome VGA monitors and stuff that made it possible for me to sell customized systems for certain purposes. And this is professional VGA card with a Tiga graphic processor. I never actually sold any of those, but back in the day, the more expensive CAD systems had the special support for the Tiga CPUs that was on this. And now we are coming over to the more professional part. They were selling novel netware, and I actually bought some novel netware installation from them because in Norway you required a certification to sell novel netware. But I was allowed to buy this from Camco without actually having this certification. So even if I took this certification on a personal level, maybe a year or two later, I was able to actually buy this, and I also got the special dealer package bought from Camco, and the dealer package from Novell, it cost about 500 krona, and then you can use it internally and also install it to use on test systems and stuff. And it was not Novell 2.2 that I was buying, it was the version 3.11 and dated 3.12 that I bought from Camco. And they had also quite affordable Ethernet adapters, and back in the day it was the NE1000 and NE2000 standard that was the real thing, because if it was either NE1000 that was the XT 8-bit interface or NE2000 compatible, you was actually able to use it on almost every network operating system. And back in the day, it was Lantastic and it was Novell, and it also was the IBM Microsoft LAN Manager suite of stuff that you had to consider. And I actually sold some of these adapters too to use on the Banyan Vines system. And this is just when Ethernet, back in the day, it was almost always coax cables. So this is coax repeaters to extend this from about 175 meters and so on if you wanted that. And it's the things you needed to connect this. And they also have drop leads in fixed length. They had Visa laser printer brand, and the Visa, as you can see earlier, it was their monitor brand. But Visa actually was a brand that was not Camco original. So Visa was an off-market brand that sold rebranded laser printers from other manufacturers. And I remember selling a Visa laser printer, and the cartridge later showed up to be a Minolta kind of cartridge. So maybe they was rebranding all their printers from them. And dot matrix printers, that was the thing. Mice, they had both Genesis and Logitech back in the day. And Genius was the preferred brand when I bought from them back in the day. And we also sold a lot of these hand scanners. And all the brochures and stuff that I made back in the day where I needed graphics and copies of things, it actually was hand scanned by one of those. They have I/O cards, parallel printers, serial, so on, memory cards, and this is mimicking in some degree what we saw in the REC catalog. They had modems. Their modems was never certified to use on the Norwegian telecom net. In 1992, I didn't have this in my price list at all. I started selling their modems in 1993, and I actually sold quite a few of the 9600 and 14400 baud modems later on. And here they have all kinds of switch boxes and connectors and cables of every kind and make. And here we come to coprocessors, and you have the dynamic RAM chips. And as you remember, we saw the price list from REC, and we have the popular brands and sizes, the 4164, 4464, and you also have the SIP and SIM modules. And this was quite affordable from Camco, and I bought a lot of these to populate these RAM boards that we saw back here, because all the RAM boards that they actually sold here was without memory chips. So that you have to pick from this list. And they also sold some additional store supplies like cleaning kits, dust heads, diskettes and disk boxes and so on. I never actually bought these kinds of supplies from Camco because I could get better prices and better payment options and stuff from other dealers. So I didn't buy anything of that from them as far as I can remember. But this price list, this is the June. I didn't bring every one of them with me now, but I actually have all of them, I think. This is the June 1992, the April. Yeah, this is actually the one that was released right before Christmas in 92. This was the April 1993. And in April they have this price list every year. And by the end of 1993 and the start of 1994, the computer market in Norway was shifting. They started to have some broader marketing stuff, and this was actually the start of the end for Camco in Norway, because I think many of the dealers was jumping off the Camco brand and buying their stuff elsewhere, because Camco was never the lowest price supplier, but they had high quality. But when we was rounding 94, the end of 94, the Camco brand did not have much extra to offer, and the dealers as REC, and as we saw in the earlier video, started their campaign where they actually did advertising and stuff in Norwegian media. So by the end of 1994, Camco was almost gone from the Norwegian market. Maybe in the early 95, probably the end of 94, they closed down their Norwegian office. And as we can see, they still continue with the same kind of price list, but they had a much narrower scope on their computers and stuff, and they had much more focus on extras and switch boxes and printers and supplies and stuff. And they also quite upped the bet a bit by releasing things like this. This is the Camco Extras brochure for 1994. And this was a quite expensive way of doing marketing, because paper was expensive even back then. And of course, in Norway, they could use Danish language, because the written language of Danish and Norwegian is almost the same. So all this is written in Danish, but they also used it in Norway, and sometimes they printed on the Norwegian address on half the brochures, but they didn't translate anything else. But this is a color brochure. It was quite uncommon, but as we will see later, REC and other brands did the same. And here they had their pick of motherboards. They had CPUs. They had cases. They had power supplies, keyboards, switches. This was an automatic switch for printers. Hard drives, memory and controller cards. This was actually a hard drive controller with a lot of cache capacity. They have game cards and other multimedia stuff, and this was 94. So the market for sound cards and other stuff was maturing, and by the end of 1994 we actually got some OEM motherboards with built-in sound capabilities. And they still sold the Visa monitors, but they also sold another brand that they called Sampo. I don't think I ever sold one of these, because by this time I had changed over to selling the ADI brand of monitors for the high-end monitors, but I still sold some of the Visa monitors. And by this time I never sold monitors with lower dot pitch than 0.28. And as you can see here, they have done the same. They have removed the higher dot pitch from their offering, and they also offering 0.26 dot pitch for their higher quality monitors. And as you can see, they actually label this as 1280 by 1024 by 60 Hz non-interlaced. And that was quite a high resolution back in the day, and if you didn't have a low enough dot pitch, you would get a very grainy picture. And this is CD-ROM drives, floppy drives, VGA cards, tape streamers. Actually quite a thing back in the day. Before networks, a lot of computers was backed up locally with local installed tape streamers, and a lot of these tape streamers was the one that you connected to your floppy drive controller. And network cards, special network card for laptops. We actually sold some of these. They connect to your parallel port, and you can get Ethernet by coax out from this. They also had this for the RJ45 standard, of course, but back in the day it was very much coax that still was the deal. And they started to get print servers so that you can share printers across the network. And when I was configuring these for use on Novell, the IPX SPX standard, and they also in the end started to supply this with the TCP IP standard, but this was special Novell devices where you could use the IPX SPX protocol for printing. They still sold Genius mouse. I actually quite enjoyed this design of mice back in the day. And here you see the hand scanners. By this time you also get flatbed scanners. They was quite pricey, but this was the end of 1994, and by 1995 this was getting quite inexpensive, and you can get a full color flatbed scanner for less than 2000 krona in 1995. Yes, and they also started to sell more brand name printers. They've changed from the Visa brand to Acer laser printers. They started to sell what they called emergency power equipment, but what is a UPS, an interruptible power supply units. And you have all kinds of cables, you have diskettes. They've started to sell the 3M brand, so they moved quite up market. And here you have the more expensive modems, and these modems I actually sold some of. Yes, and they still sold some other things. But this was the last big brochure from Camco. And I will show you one other pamphlet from Camco, and it was this. And this was actually a guide that I copied a lot from to show to customers, because many customers back in the day come with a list and said that they have so and so motherboards, they needed so and so processor, and they needed so and so with memory and stuff. And a lot of these customers was talking to the next door neighbor and got some specifications of him, but they did never understand what it actually meant. And we got a lot of customers coming in asking for 486 motherboards where you could put a Pentium, or you had to have so and so much memory and other stuff that was, yeah, it was really some of the choices that the customers come and ask for was really ridiculous in terms of both costs and future-proofing your computer. Because back in the day, it was often enough that you could change the motherboard. If you could change the motherboard, you changed the motherboard, and you could use the memory in 2 or 3 generations of CPUs and so on. But as long as you could change the motherboard, you was actually future-proof. Here they spoke about the processor generations, what the SLC and DX486, and here they actually admit what very few dealers did back in the day, that the 486 SLC DLC line of computer was actually only a slightly better 386. And they told about different buses, they told about cache memory, they told about screen cards and what you needed to get enough colors and resolutions, about the importance of a quality keyboard, about the difference of CD-ROM drives and hard drives and floppy drives. And here they tell about what you can put in and expand your system with, and that the Camco PC is a Danish quality product. And this was actually a very good way for me to sell computers, because none of the off-brand makers of computers, they did not make this kind. The big manufacturers of the day, like Compaq and IBM, Toshiba, and many of the large name brands, they didn't have this kind of guides, because their sales team was running around in suits and knocking doors and chasing big accounts, while the market that Camco was chasing was the small user company where you have maybe 2 to 5 computers, because that was a large market back in the day, and this market was totally neglected by IBM, Compaq, and the rest of the big shots. But the reason that I'm going through all of this, I walked you through the early history of REC, and I'm going to continue another video with the rest of the REC history. I'm finished now with the Camco history. I did some of the Commodore history. And the reason for all this is to give you some insight into my business. That was KOJRO Electronics and KOJRO later on. And this was my first price list of 1993. The price list of 1992, I only made one. That was a single sheet price list, and that sadly has been lost in the mist of time. I probably have the PageMaker files on some old floppy disks. This is just a preview of the price list. I will go into the KOJRO electronic business from the early 90s in another video. So that's it for this video about Camco computers. Hope you learned something and that it was an interesting bit of computer history. Thanks for watching, and please hit subscribe if you want to be notified when I post another video. And if you have some comments about the contents, some issue that you find that you are lacking details of, or if you have something else that you want me to bury deeper into, write a comment. So, thanks for watching. See you in the next video.